All right, good morning, everybody. Happy race day. Welcome to Fast Cars, Fast Money. We're talking about the Cup Series at the not Pocono, at Indianapolis for the Brickyard 400. So we're back on the oval, which is exciting. Be curious to see what type of race that we get. I was actually going to go to this race before, I had some of those medical issues, and I'm in no condition to go to the race. So maybe I'll be able to get there next year, but nonetheless, I'll have front row seats, from the couch. So looking at today's race, we got 160 laps, so really not that many from a dominator perspective. Like I said, we are going back to the oval. What are we looking at? Really, I think you can look at Pocono as probably the closest, track as a similarity. They're going to race, somewhat similar. Like we saw at Pocono, you're going to see different strategies, different teams, pitting at different times, trying to get track position, depending on when the cautions come out, either staying out to get stage points or pitting before the stage to give them better track position. So I think you're going to have some different comers and goers throughout the race. And with only 160 laps, you really want more of a focus on place differential. So I don't really think you need to jam in like two to three, lap leaders. I think you could build lines with just one lap leader, even no lap leaders, I think is going to make sense today. There's a really a lot of good place differential plays. And then finally, we're only three subs away. We're at 897 right now. We're three away from 900. So if you're watching this video and you haven't hit that subscribe button, it only takes a second. Slowly but surely, we're trying to reach our goal of 1,000. So thank you guys for all the support so far. Looking at this slate here, pricing's pretty soft. Like you can really play whoever you want. You can really get some like balanced, even stacked lineups. It's pretty easy to just play who you want. So when we talk about today's slate, you kind of have the dilemma of, what lap leader do you want to play? If you want to play a lap leader, and if you are playing a lap leader, which one is it going to be and how many are you going to play? There's arguments you can make either way. For me, most of my lines today are just single lap leader or no lap leader builds. Um, with 160 laps and how many place differential plays there are here, it's just a lot easier for these place differential plays to hit value. You're asking more of these lap leaders. But like we saw in the Xfinity series, and yes, it's a completely different package, but we saw Cole Custer and Riley Herbst start 1-2, and they finished 1-2. So, just because you start up front doesn't mean you're not a good play by any means. So when we talk about lap leaders today, there's really three lap leaders that I like. It's going to be Denny Hamlin, Kyle Larson, and Tyler Reddick. Now, the advantage that Tyler Reddick has is he's only $8,800, and he really allows you to build, comfortable, lineups. I'll say, like, you can build lineups with Reddick that just feel good. As soon as you start paying up for Hamlin, paying up for Larson, gets a little bit more difficult. It's still doable, but it's just a lot easier to build lines with Reddick. Now, Reddick did top the charts in basically everything this weekend. He was first in the single lap, first in the 5 lap, first in the 10 lap average. He qualified on the pole. He has speed this weekend. And at his price tag, it makes a lot of sense to build around Tyler Reddick today. So I really like Reddick. After Reddick, probably Denny Hamlin. Hamlin and his team have been, circling this race. They've been talking about trying to win here for forever. There's a lot of hype around him. He's the favorite coming into this weekend. He was very strong at Pocono last week. Top three in the 5 and 10 lap average. Also starts on the front row. So he has a great chance of going out there and being a lap leader as well. The only, disadvantage is his price tag compared to Reddick. So 10-5 is still pretty cheap, still easy to get into lines. You're just able to build, I'll say, more comfortable lines or get more quality level plays if you go with Reddick. And then you have Larson. So, Hamlin and Reddick are my two favorite lap leaders. I also like Larson as well. Probably have more ownership to Hamlin and Reddick, but you can't count out Larson. Larson was the quickest in the 15 lap average. Not all the cars ran 15 laps, but he was the quickest. He really wasn't that far off Hamlin and Reddick in practice either. I mean, it's close. So he's another good lap leading option. So for me, If you are playing a lap leader, I think you want at least one of Reddick, Hamlin, or Larson in your line to kind of build around. And then for me, I'm really stacking the rest of my lines with either place differential plays or kind of pivot options in those place differential ranges that I think are just drivers that are going to get overlooked. Once you get to Blaney and Elliott, they're just expensive. Blaney kind of came out of nowhere a little bit last week at Pocono. There wasn't a ton of data supporting like, hey, he's going to be good or he's going to be a race winner. And he showed up and he did it. At $10,000 though, it's a little expensive, and I'd much rather get to Hamlin and Larson over, before I get to Blaney. And with him winning last week at Pocono, I think that might spike his ownership a little bit. So I don't think he's a bad play by any means. I just think he's a little bit more of a tournament option where I'd rather get to Hamlin and Larson that I feel like have higher probability of leading laps. Now, Elliott, you can kind of throw in that boat too. Elliott was actually really good at Pocono and might have actually been a contender to win that race before they had that speeding penalty late in the race that kind of sent them to the rear of the field. And they still drove pretty far forward. So starting third, he potentially could get overlooked. I don't know how much lap leading upside he has. If you're building multiple laps, maybe he's a contrarian lap leader, maybe a pivot option off of Hamlin and Larson up there. But it's going to be tough to get to Blaney and Elliott today, especially when you have some of these other plays like Christopher Bell and Brad Keselowski. So these are some of those place differential plays that we're talking about. Christopher Bell, little concerning with the speed he had at Pocono last week and a little concerning with the speed he has this weekend at Indy. His speed is definitely better this weekend than it was last weekend, but it's a JGR car, starting 18th. A lot of place differential upside there. I feel pretty good about this team and figuring it out. And then you have Brad Keselowski. Keselowski was top 5 in the 5 and 10 lap averages in practice. He starts 26th. He offers a ton of place differential upside. He's going to be popular. But it's really easy, for these drivers to hit value and work out. Whereas if you're playing, Hamlin or Larson, you're asking more of them. They have to lead laps. They have to get you fast laps. They have to finish well. Or yeah, Christopher Bell and Brad Keselowski might lead a couple laps, might get you some fast laps. But they don't need to do as much with that place differential upside that they have. So they're just, relatively safer plays from that regard. Truex is just someone I'm really not getting to a ton, especially with Bell and Keselowski in that range. He was okay, decent speed. My fear is he starts 14th and finishes 12th or finishes 11th. Like it might be tough DFS day for him. And also, he has a penalty. He has to go to the rear of the field and he has a pass-through penalty. This track's so large, I don't really think it's really going to matter, with the stage breaks and stuff. He shouldn't, really be that far behind, but he will be in a little bit of a hole to start the race. So that's another thing kind of going against him. Now, Byron's been tough. He's kind of like Elliott, just a tough starting spot. He has good speed this weekend, pretty cheap price tag compared to where we've seen Byron, earlier in the year, but it's because his team's been struggling. We haven't really seen them up front leading laps. We haven't really seen them getting fast laps. So my concern is he starts 4th, finishes 7th, finishes 6th. Like it's going to be a decent day, but DFS wise, especially with the rest of these place differential plays, Byron's going to be just a little bit more of a tournament option. Like I said, we already talked about Reddick, really like him for GPPs. I like him for cash games. Logano, I'm not getting to. It's kind of like Truex, just, my fear is he just kind of rides around where he starts. And we've actually seen Blaney have speed out of the Penske camp, where Logano is he just seems a little tick, behind. So I'm really not getting to Logano. I really like Chris Buescher, pretty much an identical play to Brad Keselowski, just cheaper. Now, Buescher didn't have as good as speed of Keselowski, but he's also $1,000 cheaper and a lot easier to get in your line. So, roughly $1,000 cheaper. So, you can play both of them together. You can just pivot, play only one of them. There's even cheaper place differential plays on the slate as well. Not all these place differential plays are going to come through. It really comes down to, what lap leader are you building around, if any, and then what salary do you have left to, afford those different place differential plays. Not getting to Ty Gibbs, starts 6th, kind of in the same boat as Byron. I just think he has a decent day, but my fear is he runs 6th and finishes 8th. Like for DFS wise, it's not going to do it. Now, Bowman's going to be an interesting tournament pivot option, off of some of these chalky place differential plays. Bowman is someone I can see starting 13th and finishing 5th or 6th or something, which with that extra place differential and his price tag, will actually work out. And I think his ownership relatively is going to be low compared to a lot of the drivers that he's priced around because a lot of people are going to flock to those plays. So, Ross Chastain, for example, pretty rough week last week at Pocono. And just in general, Trackhouse, seems to be kind of behind this year. They aren't really in that upper tier, leading laps, contending for wins like we saw last year. But starting 28th, he doesn't really have to do much. We know this car has top 20 upside. For $8,100, really easy to fit in your lines. Kyle Busch, he's just been a DNF machine. I think it's like 50% of the races or something he's been wrecking out. This team has everything going wrong, but starting 34th, like you really just need a top 20, for him to work out. He starts so deep, he doesn't really need to do much with how bad he's been. It might keep people might be afraid to play him. Um, wasn't good at Pocono, so like I understand the reason for not playing him, but again, it's so easy for these drivers to score you positive points and have, easily, 40, 50 point days. They don't really have to do much and they're really easy to get into your lines. Bubba Wallace, I'm really just not getting him to him a ton, like just because of where he's priced. Like I'd much rather play Chastain, Bush, Cindric, Barry, Bowman over Bubba Wallace. So for those reasons, I'm really just not getting to him. Decent speed. Just we haven't really seen Wallace get the finishes, especially compared to the speed that Tyler Reddick has and the finishes that Reddick's been getting. So again, if you're building multiple lines, I think you can get to them. But for me, I'd much rather play all those drivers priced around him. Singer's going to be really popular. He did get into the wall, slow, really, really, really slow qualifying time. He's kind of the same as, Kyle Busch and Barry. We don't really need much out of him. He starts so deep in the field that we really just need a top 20 from these plays, and they're going to hit value and they're going to score you, a good chunk of points. So I like getting the Cindric. I like getting the Barry. He's basically the same play. I'd lean on Cindric more than Barry if you only want to play one of them. I don't mind playing them together. I don't mind if you play Chastain, Bush, Cindric and Barry all together. Like that's a core, place differential upside place. You can get the Busher, you can get the Keselowski, you can get the Bell, you can throw Reddick in there as your lap leader. Like those are my types of lines that I'm building. Or maybe you pay up for Hamlin or Larson and you have to go cheaper on the slate for some place differential plays. Like those are really the types of builds that I'm doing today. Suarez and Jones, I think, are more pivot options. Suarez hasn't, again, we've kind of talked about Trackhouse, hasn't really been the best. Now, Jones, I think, is interesting. If you are looking for a relatively lower owned place differential play, go to Eric Jones. He's going to see less ownership than Cindric, less ownership than Barry, less ownership than Chastain, less ownership than Bush. And he starts relatively in that, similar range. Maybe a little further out than some of those other plays, but with all the ownership going to those other plays, if they have an issue, that's a good way to potentially get some leverage on the field if you know that, majority of players are kind of, gravitating towards, a handful of plays. McDowell just starts a little bit too far. Not really getting to these SHR cars of Briscoe and Gregson. I think they just kind of run around where they start. I really like Kosovar though, so if you are paying up for Hamlin, if you are paying up for Larson, you might have to come down a little bit cheaper on the slate. Hosovar would probably be my favorite place differential play down here. Usually finishes around 18th to 20th. That'll work out for his price tag at $6,800, starting 30th. AJ Allmendinger really not getting to, Todd Gilliland, I think is another pivot option if you're not playing Hosovar, if you're not playing Haley. He did have a mechanical issue last week at Pocono, which was unfortunate, but prior to that, he was getting, top 15, top 20 finishes, pretty consistently. So a little bit of a relatively risky play, but, if you're looking for a lower owned, punt option or value option, I should say, Gillen is definitely in play there. Stenhouse starts a little bit too far forward. Haley, pricing's pretty soft, so I don't really feel like you have to come down this low. But again, depending on how top heavy you want to be with Hamlin and Larson or Bell or some of those other plays up there, you might have to come down here. So, I like Hocevar, I like Haley, mainly because of where they start and where their finishing potential is. And then after that, it gets pretty ugly. I'm not getting the Dillon, I'm not getting the Jimmy Johnson, I'm not getting the John Hunter Nemechek. If you need to come down this low, lean on Ryan Preece and Daniel Hemrick, mainly because of their starting positions. They start so deep, they can't really lose you that many points. And we've seen them being able to get, decent finishes. LaJoy, just a little bit too risky. Zane Smith, maybe, but he's just been inconsistent. Ty Dillon starts too far forward. Harrison Burton starts too far forward. And then Cody Ware and BJ McLeod are just too slow. They're going to need a ton of attrition, to hit value and work out. And with how soft pricing is, again, I don't really think you need to come down this slow. So again, for me, long story short, it's building around Hamlin, it's building around Larson, it's building around Reddick. Either one or two of those drivers in your lines, or just going all place differential. I think that's really the big dilemma that you have to face today. So hopefully that's helpful. After this, we're going to have the Olympic breaks. We're going to be off for quite some time. But thank you guys for tuning in, watching the videos, supporting the channel. Like I said, we're only 3 subs away from 900, so hopefully we can get there by the end of the day today. But best of luck with today's race, and we'll catch you after the break.